we've spent a lot of time here talking about sort of these hard skills, right? The things you throw on the resume. Maybe your skills section says like, I can do SEM, FTIR,
3D printing,
3D printing, you name it, right? Like those things are there perhaps on my resume as well. But, those are the hard skills. And, oftentimes I think we've definitely heard about this coming up through the ranks of our undergraduate experience. But I mean, certainly it's not always something that gets enough emphasis, which is this whole side of soft skills too. I mean, my God, that stuff is important too, because
it is so important.
It is because, because like for all intents and purposes, they can automate doing SEM and XRD in the next 20, 30 years with how things are progressing. We don't know, but being able to really be a human and really be a cooperative scientist or engineer is really crucial in being successful wherever you go in the field, right? You have to have soft skills, whether you're going into industry or whether you're going into grad school. It cuts the same way. And one of the great ways to be able to do that in undergraduate experience or even outside of undergrad is leadership, taking on leadership roles, leadership positions, or starting up your own ventures like a podcast. Who knows?
Who would do that?
Who would do that? But all that aside is, the best way to learn is by doing. I guess that's kind of been the spiel of this whole subset of topics here, but particularly with soft skills, right? The easiest way to learn how to lead a team is to lead a team. You could read 20 books about leading a team, and you could take a test on that book 20 times over, but you ain't gonna be any good at leading a team until you do it. And particularly as an undergrad, there's a ton of ways to be able to get involved. And our School of Material Science and Engineering had a ton of organizations. So you could kind of stick in that niche of the material science and engineering fields. But, wherever you can find an opportunity to be a leader, I think it's deeply valuable to learn how to lead a team, learn how to cooperate, learn how to solve conflicts in the professional setting, differing opinions or different points of view. I mean, that stuff is super important, and really cultivating those skills and also learning just how to keep a team organized. And going back to what Puneet said earlier, I really do like that quote about knowing where you're going and setting that out in advance. And a good leader can keep you towards that path. And then beyond the undergraduate experience, something I'm starting to get a vision into moving into full-time is at bigger companies, they tend to have these smaller employee groups, or some call them like affinity groups, but different companies like brand them different ways. But there are also opportunities in those sorts of ways to get leadership positions or, help build community within a company or an organization. And certainly if you're in grad school, there's student organizations again as well. So, look for those opportunities to keep developing soft skills.
For sure. And I just wanted to reemphasize the importance of learning by doing. Like that is really the best way to learn in my opinion. And it's super important to have those soft skills. Like I know I mentioned that, everybody will be taking classes, and to an extent, people will be learning some of these materials testing and materials characterization techniques. You won't be the only one to do that. But the way you can differentiate yourself is through soft skills and just, being likable, but being able to work with the team, being adaptable. Yeah. And I've heard from, multiple people, basically at career fairs, employers will be like, hey, we really wanted to interview your students, right? But they had all the hard skills necessary, but they just didn't have the soft skills. And that's why we couldn't offer them an interview, couldn't offer them a job. And all I want to say is you don't want to be that person where like you had everything on your resume, you had everything right, but you just didn't have the soft skills or, potentially the leadership experiences that would make you different from every other candidate. So yeah, I just want to further back what Tom said. Leadership positions, particularly in student organizations, I learned so much through my experience as president of Material Advantage. And it was just crazy. Like looking back at it now, before that, I was like, I am not a good leader. Like, I don't even know if I can do this. And kind of just my confidence rose as I figured more things out, dealt with more different difficult circumstances, learned the organization aspect, learned the importance of collaboration, like really leading and inspiring, because it's not easy. People have different priorities and you kind of have to figure out a way to connect the dots and explain the why for the importance of your organization. And when you start to figure all that out, you grow personally and you grow professionally.
And talking about having to grow into something is also really crucial into starting to build into getting those first opportunities to work and be in industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of times for us undergraduate students, that comes in the form of an internship or a co-op, or more on the research side of the spectrum could be something like an REU. And there are a number of different ways to get involved in those opportunities. But like we said earlier, it's not as trivial as just filling out a Google form and sending an email and being like, hooray.
It's not easy.
And so going into some of those stories there about how we got our first internships and how sort of applying what we've been talking about in this first part of this discussion here, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Wow, are you a podcaster or something?
I might be, we'll see.
Let's unpack that. Sure. Yeah. And so, just to talk about my first internship experience in terms of, actually getting it, it was kind of wild. Basically, I was part of a research program my freshman year, and Solvay actually sponsored my research. And so when I presented it at our, poster session, our industry day, as you call it, the president of Solvay at that time, very high up C-suite executive, went around the presentation day and just started listening to our presentations. And so I was able to have that short conversation with him and really explain, what my research was about and just establish that relationship. And so this is something that's important for not just your first internship, but for every professional experience. Networking is important. And so really like the following year, or maybe it was a couple of years after that, I reached back out to him, just sent him an email, attached my resume. It was like, hey, Solvay seems really cool to me. And this is why I think it would be a good fit. And we had talked earlier, but this was super awesome. And so he just sent my resume along to different departments. And just from thinking about it, if you get an email from the president of your company saying like this student would be good, you tend to like notice it, right? And so at that point, I didn't even know he was the president. I just thought he was like, just a representative from Solvay. Yeah, like I did not know how big he was, but I ended up getting a call from the manager of the polymer characterization labs, and it kind of just ended up working out. But really, networking is super important, and it's important to continue to establish those relationships and develop them and keep reaching back out. Don't just one-off relationship. It's important to use your resources.
Okay, so full disclosure, I didn't realize that that's how you actually ended up getting that opportunity.
Yep, that is.
Wow. Like we've talked about that experience many times, but I had no idea that you just kind of had not your foot in the door, but you had that connection from top down. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And I don't think I know like the details of your internship experience or like how you got it. I know some details, but you got to tell me more.
So essentially my first, let's call it internship, was actually working in our make and measure space that was on campus in material science and engineering called The Mill. And I spent a summer there working full time. And so that was kind of my first experience, but I was already an established leader within that organization. And, there was a process to apply and everything like that. But, I had a very strong connection just because I was very heavily involved. I was talking to the professor who was leading the space. And then I was talking to him. I was like, is this something I could do? And he was like, yeah, it would be great to have you on board for the summer to work full time. So that was definitely networking made that a very confident, surefire thing. And I was kind of already very involved there, but that was sort of a special circumstance and what ended up being a great internship. But, I worked full time in a, something of a lab for a summer. And so in The Mill, I learned all these great skills about just doing research. And, I did lead a team in some capacity that whole summer, which was another great experience. But, by the end of that summer, I could fill up my resume with most of the major materials characterization things under the sun, right? And have a little bit of soft skills to boot, which was great. So in terms of the hard skills, that was really kind of the foundation that helped me get the industry experience, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of my friends from a semester previous, he essentially texted me in the fall following that experience in The Mill. And he had recently finished up an internship with GE. He said, hey, I think you should apply. I think you'd be a great candidate. I was like, well, first of all, thanks. Appreciate it. But the great thing about it, I was like, second of all, like, how do you think I should go about doing this? And nothing insidious about asking that question. But, every company kind of has their own, for better and for worse, kind of has their own knack about, how they best try to kind of gather names and try to get the foot in the door sort of thing. But I know for them in particular, they had essentially, and this is very common on university campuses, they had an info session, and then they were also showing up to our career fair. It was fall time. It was, as they lovingly called around to your career fair season. And so, and that was a great way for me to get my foot in the door. And so he essentially said, go to the info session. He's like, just talk to all the recruiters, just talk to them and see which one's also showing up to the MSE career fair the next day, and try to talk to them again. And they're also personable people, so it's easy to strike up a conversation with them. You know, they're normal people too, which was great.
As always, yes, they're human.
As always. So, but, you know, that really worked, is that he said, go to the info session and then try to touch base again that next day with the same person. And then if they can remember your name out of a sea of 1,000 students or whatever that these big companies will talk to, then you're in a pretty good shot to at least get an interview. And so that's pretty much how it happened. Is I had a friend who said, these are the 2 things that you probably need to do to really help set you up to get an interview. Go do them, and you'll probably be fairly successful. And it was also great too to have a friend who worked, and just a fellow undergrad who worked at one of these companies, to say like, hey, what'd you do? Is this work cool? Is it interesting? Is this something that I could foresee myself doing? And I think a lot of people times give networking this like bad rep for being very, I don't quite know how to describe it, but it's like only giving jobs to your friends sort of thing. But it's like, no, there are a bunch of other great things that come with it. And I know for me, it just definitely helped me understand the process much more simply than a lot of Googling could have done. It saved me time in that way.
And it makes sense how you actually ended up giving me a lot of recommendations after both of our first internships. And that's kind of how we both ended up interning at GE last summer, right? And a lot of what you just said is what you told me. You know, go to the info sessions, talk to everybody, then go to the actual career fair, all majors, then go to the MSE career fair. So I ended up talking to, and then we had a material advantage event the next day. So I ended up talking to some of these recruiters like 4 separate times, and obviously they'll remember my face then. So yes, that's super, super important and super effective when they can attach a name to a face and you become recognizable.